be around, see how they can do better authorization, find the differentiation between do better authentication and authorization. Many cool stuff. So really exciting to be here today and really exciting to be people understanding the importance of fine-grained authorization and implementing it in their applications. But now I'll let you, Philip, start your show.
For sure, for sure. So I'm just going to screen share. Let's start the slideshow. Can you see it? Is it visible? It should be. All right, all right. So welcome everyone. This is going to be a quick and to the point talk about the introduction to authorization and the importance of authorization when we're actually starting to implement our applications and how we think about the basic blocks of actually building our applications. So the things we need to actually make the app, perform well, but most importantly, be secure. But before we begin, I do want to talk about one special thing. So at the end of this talk, we're going to be announcing a way to kind of get some prizes and more specifically, get a bunch of permit exclusive stickers that we will send to you. And I'll let you know how you can get your hands on those at the end. So make sure you tune in. It shouldn't be too long. This webinar or this masterclass or this introduction to authorization, it should only take about 30 minutes at most. All right. But first, when we're talking about authorization, I kind of want to take a few steps back and I want to kind of give you an introduction into the whole flow of identity and access management, and more precisely to let you realize just the basic fundamentals of application design and security. So I want you to imagine one thing. I want you to imagine that you build your application that you've been working on so hard and that you deploy this application, that you run it, and then obviously you want to have some users start to use it. And you deploy this to production and you have this amazing product that you have been working so hard on, and then suddenly an engineer comes across and he creates a pull request. And that pull request says that you have urgent security fixes to correct. And obviously you look at this pull request and you're a little stunned because you don't understand what the security risks are. And maybe you thought that everything was fine. And maybe you thought that you implemented everything correctly, but someone comes across and lets you know that, yep, well, there is some security flaws. And how do you manage them? Or how do you manage security in your applications in general? So, at that point, you start to panic. You don't know what's going on. Mayday, mayday. What do we do to fix these security issues? And how can we make sure that our application is robust and secure? So, first of all, I'd like to touch on authentication. Now, in general, we're going to be talking about both authentication versus authorization. They both sound very similar. A lot of people get them confused, probably more than you might imagine. But the first step is the authentication step. Now, there is a bunch of authentication providers that are currently being offered as a solution that you can implement into your authentication. But one important thing I'd like to point out is if we take ourselves back, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, to the time when we still weren't as good at building applications, we used to write authentication ourselves. And surely I can remember myself writing my own authentication in high school in PHP and creating the whole user login, making sure that the user is who he claims to be and so on. Can you imagine how robust that was? Well, maybe if someone knew what they were doing, maybe it was, but at this moment in time, nobody is willing to undertake this challenge. Why? Well, because there's too many security risks that are involved with writing your own. Therefore, there's so many providers out there that we instantly think of and we're like, yep, I'm not going to write this on my own. I'm just going to pick a provider that's going to do it for me because I know that there is a whole team behind it that does it very well. That it's definitely secure. It's definitely going to confirm the identity of my users, and I'll be able to keep track of everything. But then what's next? Well, once we implement our authentication, well, we have to implement authorization. And that's the building block that people are starting to realize today. Like Gabriel said, he was at KubeCon and more people are realizing that authorization is extremely important. when we went to DevWorld, a lot of people came to our booth and they said, hey, you know what? Actually, we are struggling with this. This is an issue. We've created something ourselves, and suddenly, we need to expand our company, scaling, it's growing. We get more granular permissions, but we don't know how to handle it. And writing it on our own, yes, we can do it, but maybe there is a solution out there. In the same way as authentication solutions are out there, maybe there is something that handles authorization. But then again, a lot of people come to the booth and rather than saying authorization, they say authentication. So what is the difference? I think we kind of need to set that straight. So I have a good example that I want to tell you about. And the example is a public library example. So imagine that you are wanting to rent a book or to borrow a book from the library. And you go into the library, you search through all the books, you pick out the book that you want, and then you go to the librarian, and then you say, hey, I want to rent this book. And the question that she comes back to you with is, do you have your library membership so you can rent this book? And along with the library membership, every time you create a library membership, you have to confirm and you have to give your actual ID card and you have to confirm who you are actually as a person. If you are a real person, are you who you claim to be? And by giving the librarian that card, she can then verify that you are actually, Philip, Sam, Mary, Gabriel, and therefore she can issue you the book. However, that is authentication. But what if you want to go to different sections in the library? What if you want to join a book club? What if you want to rent a book that may be restricted, or maybe it's for a VIP only library members? Maybe you have a specific status of reading an X amount of books a year for you to be able to rent out the most unique pieces that they have on the very top shelf of the library. Well, in that case, that is authorization. You might be able to do so, but you might not have the right status, or what we say, the right role to rent that unique book, to access that specific section, that VIP section of the library, or to get access to specific rooms within the library, or to maybe wander around where you might not be authorized to do so. And that's the difference between authentication and authorization in a real-world scenario. Your library card, your entrance into the library, and your privileges to enter the library is essentially what authentication is. It's making sure who you are, and then being able to access the unique pieces, the books, the rooms, or the other things that they might have in the library is based on your roles, your status, and therefore that's authorization. But how is authorization implemented? How do we implement authorization? And how do we even start by thinking about roles, and how do we apply them into our applications? So usually what happens is every time there is a security issue, or maybe every time an engineer inside a company decides, well, we need further permissions for this person or another person within the company, they need to create a ticket for this, a ticket to kind of implement the authorization, implement the changes in the rules that are then going to take effect and allow someone to do more or maybe less than they were previously allowed to do. However, authorization, as you can see, I have this beautiful diagram here, and it's called the OWASP Top 10 Risks in Security. And in 2017, we can see that broken access control was in the top 10 list. And as the years have gone on, and as people started to realize how security is so important, and as bad people, as I like to call them, started to find vulnerabilities in applications of how to break that access control and how to access your system without having the authorization to do so, well then broken access control has topped the #1 charts, and it has been the most the biggest risk on the OWASP top 10 list in the year 2021. I believe it was also 2022. I'm not sure about 2023, probably also 2023. And as you can see right here, we have a quote, and it says 94% of applications were tested for some form of broken access control. Now that number is extremely scary, because the potential of you implementing a security risk without considering or having broken access control is actually extremely plausible. And we don't want that. We don't want developers to be making those mistakes. We want developers to definitely follow best practices and make sure that when they do design their applications, when they do pick the building blocks that they use to create that application, especially if it's something that is important, it might be a healthcare company, it might be a bank, it might be fintech. These are things that should definitely be discussed in your team. Now, here we have another slide that shows just the top API security risks. And as you can see, broken object level authorization also comes at the top, which is, worrying, as I can say. And then on second place is broken authentication. So these two go hand in hand, and they're extremely, extremely important. And they also work together. Now, as you can see, we have a bunch of different examples where Uber had an incident. Companies that you would think everything, is right inside of them. Well, no, they're broken. Here we have MailChimp, who was hacked. Here we have another company, HelpNet Security. Here we have another company talking about broken access control, and another one. So there is a huge amount of these, articles coming out, how these huge companies are making the mistake, or some people are missing the little minute details and then allowing, the hackers or the bad people, as I like to call them, to enter and exploit the vulnerabilities that they have in their applications. Now, understanding permissions in general is quite difficult because you need to really understand how your company works and how the hierarchy in the company works and how those permissions need to be applied. But I think what's even more difficult is actually solving for permissions and writing a correct solution that will make sure that everything actually works without putting the risk on yourself as the developer that you might have done something wrong. Now, in general, access control is hard, and there is multiple things about access control and multiple things why it actually becomes quite hard for us to understand and to implement. First of all, we moved over from monolith architectures to complex microservices. Now we're dealing with multiple microservices that we might have to restrict access to. These microservices are talking to each other, and it's much, much harder to implement this level of access and this level of role management across different microservices. Secondly, there is so many scenarios that we have to cover. There's a magnitude of different roles that you might need inside your company. There's a magnitude of different use cases that you might need to implement to make sure that nothing is missed. And keeping a track of these use cases is also quite difficult. Then there is various departments inside a company. If the company is huge, there is the marketing department, there is the HR department, engineering department that are currently challenging the solution of how they need to have access control implemented. And as a company, as the engineer who is responsible for this authorization, you have to adjust to all these solutions that are brought up or use cases that are brought up and find the solution for them for those different departments. Finally, or actually before, the second to last, there is the minor bugs that get implemented into your application. The little things, they can have absolutely devastating effects on the security of your application. And then again, what is the best way to implement permissions? How do we go about it? What do we use? How do we think about it? Well, let's actually talk about permissions from the ground up. And let's try and understand a typical use case, how an engineer would approach solving for a permission or for implementing an authorization system or implementing a new authorization rule. Imagine that you have an engineer and he wakes up on Monday morning and he goes into work and his manager, his CEO or CTO tells him, we need to implement a permission system and we need you to be responsible for doing so. And the first task is you need to create a role, some resources, or maybe 2 roles, an admin, for example, and go forth with that. And the engineer does it. He creates the admin role. He implements some basic permission system, and it's all good. It works. That's it. A few days later, suddenly, something happens. They need a little bit more complexity, and they need to implement another role. So the first role the engineer implemented was an admin role. Now you need more granular or higher permissions. And now the engineer thinks, okay, so now I just need to add another role. So let me add a super admin. And he adds a super admin, implements some rules, pushes the PR, all great. But then the company grows, more time goes past and more rules need to be implemented, more resources, more checks have to be added into your application. And suddenly the engineer is overwhelmed. He has a huge amount of tickets. He has a huge amount of requirements. Every ticket requires a PR. Every ticket requires a review. Every ticket requires tests. And it just goes on and on and on. And with the amount of work that this engineer has, well, they need to now hire more engineers and they need to expand the team for writing authorization. And suddenly the engineers are just very, very, very disappointed at what they have to do and how they have to manage this. So how do we solve this to not make that mistake? Well, let's talk about policy engines and open source. Now, the way permissions work and the way we implement permissions and we evaluate permissions is with policy engines. Now, policy engines understand the code that you have written, and there is many different policy engines out there. There is things like OPA, which is the Open Policy Agent. There's things like also and Cedar by AWS. All these policy engines have their own policy language, and they can understand that language. They can understand the rules, and then they can make decisions based on the query that reaches that policy engine. But these policy engines, every single one of them is limited. How are these policy engines limited? Well, the problem with policy engines is that they can understand and evaluate the rules, but they don't have the possibility of being updated in real time. So now if you want to make a change within your system, now if you want to, for example, you have a bunch of customers and suddenly one of the customers become paying and you have to change them the role because they now have more permissions within your system, well, an engineer will have to go ahead, create a ticket, write the specific code that's for the specific policy engine. Then obviously that will have to be submitted as a PR, evaluated, tested, and then merged, and then that effect would take place. So there is no real-time updates that are available in all the policy engines that we currently have available. So how do we solve for this issue? Well, there is a very good example about Netflix and this problem. Now, what Netflix did is they found this to also be an issue, and they decided to build something that allows the real-time tracking of those changes and the real-time of updating that policy as the user, for example, it's triggered, or as the change gets triggered by an action, or it gets triggered by a subscription, or whatever it might be. Now, the only problem that happened with Netflix under a solution is that they didn't open source it to other developers. And as you can feel, we all became very, very sad because that happened, because they had a great solution, but they didn't give it to anyone else to use. So what did we have to do? Well, we at Permit decided to write our own open source project that will solve for this limitation in all policy engines. And that project is called Opal. It stands for the Open Policy Administration Layer. Now, Opal is essentially a layer that sits on top of the policy engine, and it provides real-time updates to the policies that we have. Now, because of this, now we're able to run the policies. We're able to have the real-time updates. So anytime a change gets triggered, anytime we subscribe to a specific event and we notice that event change, we re-trigger the rebuild of that code, the regeneration of that code, and then we have that policy engine be able to understand it right off the bat. Now, that is a great solution, but are there any other solutions out there? Any other solutions that allow you to manage those policies without the complexity of writing the code, without the complexity of managing the policy engine? Well, there are. And actually, we can talk as policy as low code, no code. Now, specifically in this case, policy as no code is quite important. Because at Permit, we have a SaaS application, an application in the cloud that lets you manage all those policies in a no-code UI. And here in the picture, you can see that no-code UI and you can see what it looks like. And specifically what you can see in the picture is our no-code policy editor. It's a policy editor that allows you to create different roles. We can see an admin and a product manager here, create different tasks, different resources, different actions for those resources. And therefore, by just checking the simple boxes, as you save those changes, after you check those boxes, those policies get evaluated for you. That code gets generated for you and it gets sent to the policy engine. As part of the Permit solution, we also offer you a microservice for authorization. It's a thing that you just deploy out of the box. You just run one command in your terminal and that policy engine deploys for you. Opal, which wraps that policy engine, also deploys for you. And it talks with this no-code policy editor. And then all you have left to do as an engineer is just create very simple enforcements in your code. And, well, that's it, basically. And then everything suddenly works out of the box. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the Permit solution. So you have a link at the bottom. You can go into app.permit.io and just try it for yourself or read our docs. But that's basically a solution that's currently offered out there that you might be interested in. And if you were at our booth at DevWorld, you probably heard about it. You probably saw it. And you most probably took one of the leaflets to find out more about it. So some of you watching and some of you listening might already be familiar with this solution. But now, what's the moral of the story of implementing authorization? How do we approach it? What do we have to do to make sure we do it right? When do we consider authorization? Well, the times are currently changing. Things are going forward. Security is becoming a bigger risk every single day for all modern applications. Our architectures are getting more complex. There is constantly more things to think about. And if we were, as I like to call it, bare metal engineer, and we wanted to write this all on our own, it almost becomes impossible to do so. There's too many things to remember. There's too many things to write. That's why dedicated teams in engineering departments are becoming a thing, and they're focusing on specifics that need to create this application. But most applications that we create today are based out of building blocks, are based out of creating the actual app and picking the framework, then implementing the authentication to allow users to log in, then and should implement authorization to control the access that the users have inside the application, and then all the other functionality that you want to embed your app that you think is substantial. So now for the final part of this event and for the final part of this webinar or masterclass, as we spoke at the beginning with Gabriel, we have a bunch of an interesting proposition for you. And essentially what we ask you to do is that if you join our Slack community, which currently has over 1,600 members, so it's a very vibrant community, and you can join and see the companies that work there, the questions people are asking, the things that, the problems that people currently have. So you can really start to understand the problem space. Now, if you join this community and you message myself or you message Gabriel or you message Daniel, send us your address and we'll send you a nice sticker pack of all the stickers that we have currently available within Permit. So I'd love to see you guys there. I'd love to see you join the community. Just follow this link and it will take you straight to our Slack and ask a question and tell us about your authorization journey. Tell us about your authentication journey. Tell us about the problems that you're facing. Yes, we are a SaaS product-oriented community, but also we like to help other engineers as well. If you have any problems or if you're stuck on something, the whole Permit R&D team is there to also help you with any problems that you may have. And now I'd like to finish kind of the quick lightning talk there, and I'd like to open up this presentation for questions. So do we have any questions from the community?
Seems like people are happy. Question can be asked on the chat, on the Zoom chat.
Yeah, so there is a chat in the Zoom, or I know Daniel is probably tracking some chats because it's being live streamed to YouTube. So if there are any questions, drop them down below now. There's actually a Q&A option. So there's a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, you can put your questions in the Q&A option. You can put your questions in the webinar chat. We'll give some people a couple of minutes to write those up if you have any.
And when you maybe want to share again the link to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Let me share. So the community, you can join the community at bit.ly/permit-slack. So that's bit.ly/permit-slack. So I'd like to see a lot of addresses popping up if you want the stickers to be dispatched to you. We can probably even get that sorted this week. So probably next week you might receive them. For all those that have braved through and listened to me talk for 20 minutes. And hopefully you guys have learned a bunch of authorization things today, or just understood the problem space, which I think is very, very important, because the next time you're probably going to build your projects, I hope you're going to consider also thinking about implementing authorization and how you will do so. Gabriel, do you have anything to add? We can't hear you because you're muted.
That's happened. Yeah, so you did a great job. I really enjoyed that. I even learned a new thing. And I think many trends getting authorization into the hot space now, especially the AI and the new identities that we are hosting in our applications, that brings many like new issues and the need for fine-grained authorization. The data is getting unstructured and we need security to be structured. So the competition between unstructured data and structured decisions is never was that fast, or whatever the right term to describe it. But anyway, fine-grained authorization is here and we are super happy. I mean, especially people like me and Filip that used to work for authorization years ago before it was that popular, and see now every developer trying to collaborate with us and, you know, getting the better, more secure, more stable decisions and policy in their application. I always really enjoyed to see that. So
Yes.
yeah, I really want to take the chance also to thank everyone who joined.
And we actually have a question. We have a question from Sandeep, and he is asking, do we have a Kong API gateway plugin? We do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share now. I'll type an answer because I really want to share the link. So Permit is one of the unique proposal of Permit is it what's called battery included. So the policy engine themselves, we are using open source policy engine like Open Policy Agent or AWS Cedar, and we are actually going to support OpenFGA soon. So the nice thing about Permit is that you get an offer, but you can also trust the policy engine themselves. And Open Policy Agent is a Kong plugin, and there is a very simple way to configure your Kong to work together with Permit using the Open Policy Agent. And I'm just sharing the link to our docs where you can find the exact instruction on how to implement Kong plugin into your with your Permit policies or Open Policy Agent policies.
Amazing, amazing. Since we have no other questions, which just makes me happy because that just proves to me that maybe I've explained it somewhat in a good way.
Absolutely.
I think we're also running out of our time. So I think this is a great time to wrap up. Gabriel, thanks for joining me and thanks for your support.
Thank you, Filip.
Thanks for being here. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you found it insightful. And we can't wait to hear from you in the community and to hear your story when it comes to implementing authorization. If not now, I'm sure you're going to come across it in the future and you'll have something cool to share. So we'll wait for you in the community. And again, thanks for joining this little lightning session on the introduction to authorization.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.